Congratulations to the Texas Rangers, the World Series champions for 2023. Let's take a moment and celebrate the Rangers franchise, and I'll tell you all about the history of the team. What's going on, everybody? Thanks again for joining me on my channel, Brutus on Baseball. Today's video is a history all about the Texas Rangers franchise in honor of the brand new World Series champions. This video is number 7 in a series all about the team histories that I've made from Major League Baseball. I've been through 6 of them already. Check them out. Orioles, Braves, Blue Jays, those are some of the more recent ones. But today we're going to pick it up with the Texas Rangers. The Texas Rangers franchise originally started out as the Washington Senators, but not those Washington Senators. The Senators were around for a long time, existing as a franchise since 1901. But the Washington Senators from 1901 until 1960 are actually tied to another team in the American League Central that we'll get to one of these days. Now, the roots of the Texas Rangers back in Washington only go back to the 1961 season with a brand new expansion team that year. You see, this is what happened. Major League Baseball was proposing expansion in the early 1960s for both the American League and the National League. But the owner of the Washington Senators in the late 1950s didn't really like the situation that was going on in Washington, especially with the recent move of the St. Louis Browns to become the Baltimore Orioles. He had direct competition, and the Orioles were becoming quite the team. So the original Senators requested to Major League Baseball to move their team. Once the move of the original Senators happened, Major League Baseball was free to award a brand new franchise to Washington, D.C. again. And they did so in the 1961 season, giving franchises to both the Los Angeles Angels and the Washington Senators for a second time. Major League Baseball was planning to expand in 1962, with 2 new teams in the American League and 2 new teams in the National League. They kept that plan in the National League, giving 2 expansion teams in 1962, but they were forced to hurry to expand in 1961 in the American League. Why? They were pressured to expand a year early when powerful members of Congress got involved, who said that the nation's capital shall not be looted of its franchise even for 1 season. Major League Baseball did not want to get on the bad side of Congress, who had the power to remove their coveted antitrust exemption. So, as a result, they hurriedly arranged for expansion immediately in 1961. Now, while in Washington, the second incarnation of the Senators were a horrible team, never finishing above 4th place in the 11 seasons that they spent playing in Washington. And during that tenure, the big Frank Howard was probably their best player. The team actually went through several different ownership changes in that short period that they spent in Washington, mostly run by individuals that had very little knowledge about how to run a Major League Baseball team. About the only thing that went right during their tenure in Washington was when Bob Short decided to hire the great Ted Williams to manage the team in 1969, which led them to their best finish of 4th place, the only season that they would finish above 500 while in Washington. Not only that, like I said, they were competing against the Baltimore Orioles, who were becoming a juggernaut of a team in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when the 2 teams are only 45 miles apart. By 1970, Bob Short let it be known to anybody willing to listen that he was willing to sell the team, but if he didn't get a serious bid by that year, he would be open to moving the team elsewhere. Now, Bob Short initially explored the idea of moving the team to Buffalo, New York, but when that deal fell apart, the next suitor in line was Dallas, Texas. They were specifically appealing because they had Turnpike Stadium, which had recently been built for a minor league team. And with some renovations, it could actually be expanded into a major league ready field pretty quickly. The owner of the Houston Astros at the time was standing in the way of the Senators' move to Dallas, thinking that the entire state of Texas was Astros territory. But the vote was held in September of 1971, and approval was given to move the Washington Senators to Texas starting the 1972 season. Now, Senators fans were angry. They had a team from the turn of the century all the way to 1960, and they had just lost them a decade before. Now they were given a brand new franchise who played horribly, and they were about to lose them too in baseball in Washington. The fans stormed the gates at the Senators' last home game in 1971 after the security guards decided to walk off the job. Several hundred people even raided the field in the 9th inning with 2 outs and started stealing different pieces of the field to take as keepsakes, including one man that stole first base from the ground and ran off with it with no security guards there to chase him. With only 3 bases left and hundreds of fans on the field, the umpires had no choice but to call the game, and the Senators were forced to forfeit the game to the Yankees, even though the Senators were winning with 2 outs in the 9th inning. So the team picked up and moved for the 1972 season to Arlington, Texas, a suburb directly between Dallas and Fort Worth, where Turnpike Stadium was located. Upon moving to Texas, the team immediately changed their name to the Texas Rangers in honor of the statewide law enforcement agency that had been founded in 1823 when Texas was still actually a part of Mexico. Now, Ted Williams actually moved with the team to Texas for 1 season in 1972. But he was quite vocal about being unhappy with the team's new location and decided to retire after just 1 season at the helm of the Rangers. Now, the Rangers did lose 100 games each of the first 2 seasons that they found themselves in Texas. But they were able to find success fairly early on by 1974 when they had Jeff Burroughs, who won the MVP award, Mike Hargrove, who won the Rookie of the Year award, Ferguson Jenkins, who won the Comeback Player of the Year award, and Billy Martin, who won Manager of the Year that season. But still, they could not claw their way into first place. They had several more good seasons between 1977 and 1981, but just were never able to finish higher than 2nd place in any of those years. And they wouldn't actually find themselves in a first place position until 1994. Which happened to be the same year as the baseball players' strike. So even though they had finally made their way to first place, there was no playoffs or World Series to find out what the Rangers could do. Throughout the 1980s, the Rangers again were a mediocre team. Not great, but not too bad either. But the fortunes started to change a little bit for the Rangers, starting with the 1989 season, when they signed legendary pitcher Nolan Ryan to a contract to finish out his last 5 seasons with the Rangers. By bringing Nolan Ryan to the Rangers uniform, they were able to celebrate several of his most important milestones to finish out his career, like his 300th win, his 5,000th strikeout, and his 6th and 7th no-hitters of his career. Also in that same year, the owner of the Rangers at that time decided to sell the team to an investment group that was led, at least on the face, by George W. Bush. Although Bush's stake in the team was only about 10%, he was named the lead managing partner and was the face of the ownership group for that franchise. Bush also led the charge to build a new stadium for the Rangers to replace the aging stadium that they had been playing in since 1972 when they first moved to Texas. There was some controversy with the new stadium, though, when the city seized 13 acres of land around the stadium to support the new development. There were several years of lawsuits as a result of this, which eventually led to a settlement of $22 million in favor of those landowners. But the Texas Rangers refused to actually pay that settlement. And Bush's tenure with the team would be a short one, as he resigned from his position in 1994 when he became the governor of Texas. Now, the Rangers of the 1990s were a hard-hitting team, with pure hitters like Ivan Rodriguez, Juan Gonzalez, Rusty Greer, and Will Clark. And they reached the postseason for the first time in franchise history several times between 1996 and 1999. But those Rangers of the later 1990s were really short on pitching and were swept aside each of the postseasons that they made. The Rangers were sold again in 1998, this time to billionaire Tom Hicks, who agreed to not only buy the Rangers, but to actually pay down that $22 million that was owed as part of the previous lawsuits. Looking to make a big splash, Hicks decided to put the Rangers on the map with a huge signing in 2001 of star shortstop from the Seattle Mariners, Alex Rodriguez. He signed Rodriguez to a 10-year, $252 million contract, by far the biggest contract in the history of baseball. The signing was frowned upon not only within the industry itself, but by the fans as well, because it was seen as putting all of their eggs in one basket instead of improving the pitching staff, which had become a constant issue for the Texas Rangers. Now, A-Rod did perform exceptionally well while with the Texas Rangers, hitting 52, 47, and 57 home runs, and placing second in the MVP award voting in 2002 and winning the award in 2003. But despite these outstanding performances by their star shortstop, the Rangers still finished in last place every year between 2001 and 2003. Realizing that they could not buy a championship with just signing one player, both the Rangers and Alex Rodriguez grew tired of losing, and the relationship soured fairly quickly. This resulted in the Rangers trading A-Rod to the New York Yankees after the 2003 season for a group of players headlined by Alfonso Soriano. Now, the Rangers would once again play out the 2000s, hovering around 500 baseball for many of those seasons. Never quite good and never quite that bad either. But with the economy plummeting in 2008 as a result of the housing crisis, Tom Hicks found himself in a lot of financial trouble and immediately started exploring selling the team. In 2009, it was actually reported that Hicks had to borrow money from Major League Baseball in order to meet his payroll obligations to the team. In January of 2010, Hicks reached an agreement to sell the team to a new investment group led by Pittsburgh attorney Chuck Greenberg and team president Nolan Ryan. But the deal dragged on as various creditors were concerned about being able to recoup the money that they had lent the Rangers. And it came out that several different players, including Alex Rodriguez, Kevin Millwood, and Michael Young, were still owed back salary from the previous seasons. After several different attempts to resolve the deal, the Rangers actually ended up filing for bankruptcy in May of 2010, and they were put up for public auction in August of 2010. Now, even though it was a public auction, there's not a whole lot of groups that can make a bid for the Rangers to compete with that Chuck Greenberg, Nolan Ryan-led team. There was one other group that submitted a bid, though, the future owner of the Houston Astros, Jim Crane, along with Mark Cuban. But even though they submitted a very competitive bid, the Greenberg-Nolan Ryan group still walked away with the winning bid. And the new ownership group was dubbed the Ranger Baseball Express, a play on Nolan Ryan's nickname, the Ryan Express. But then not long after that, after a falling out in 2011, Chuck Greenberg actually sold his interest in the team, and Nolan Ryan would be named the controlling owner of the baseball club. Under Ryan's new leadership, the Rangers saw immediate success in 2010 and again in 2011. Behind the stellar play of guys like Adrian Beltre, Josh Hamilton, Michael Young, Nelson Cruz, and an aging Vladimir Guerrero, they finally won their first playoff series in 2010 after over 50 years of existence. And they would reach the World Series twice in 2010 and in 2011. They would make the playoffs a handful more times between 2012 and 2016, behind Adrian Beltre, Ian Kinsler, and a newly acquired Cole Hamels. But they would not be able to reach the World Series again, and they would go into rebuild mode in the late 2010s. They would not reach the World Series again until this year, 2023, behind the play of guys like Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, and Adolis Garcia. Now, let's take a moment and look back at the stadiums the Rangers franchise has played in. The new expansion Washington Senators played the 1961 season at Old Griffith Stadium, where the previous Senators team had actually played. But after only one season there, they moved in the 1962 season to the new District of Columbia Stadium, now called RFK Memorial Stadium. After moving to Texas, they played in Arlington Stadium from 1972 until 1993, followed by the Ballpark in Arlington starting in 1994, which was later renamed Globe Life Park. And they played there from 1994 to 2019. But that's not to be confused with Globe Life Field, which was built just down the street and opened up for the 2020 season. You may be wondering, why did they build a ballpark in 1994 and then another one for the 2020 season? The life of that stadium as a major league park didn't last very long. Well, the reason is, ever since moving to the Dallas area in the 1970s, the Rangers were consistently playing in one of the hottest baseball stadiums in Major League Baseball, when the temperatures constantly topped out at over 100 degrees during the daytime. The new stadium that they built just in 1994 didn't have a roof, which did not give the team much flexibility other than to play at night to avoid the heat. The new stadium built in 2020, Globe Life Field, has a retractable roof to give the team the option of having day or night games with the roof open or closed. Now, before we move on from ballparks, there's one more interesting thing that happened during both the opening of Globe Life Park in 1994 and Globe Life Field in 2020. In 1994, they opened the brand new stadium, only to have the season ruined in August of 1994 by the players' strike, and the Rangers would not be able to see that year what kind of impact they would have on the playoffs. And again, when they opened up their brand new stadium in 2020, the COVID pandemic had hit, and there was no opening day for the brand new stadium when they had scheduled it. Luckily though, by the end of that season, the Texas Rangers had agreed with Major League Baseball that they would be a neutral host site for the 2020 World Series, and they allowed 25% of the capacity for fans to attend the World Series games. But even so, both of the inaugural seasons for their last two stadiums had to have been disappointments compared to what the expectations were. Now, looking back at the playoff history for the Rangers franchise, the team did not make the playoffs a single time when they were in Washington as the Senators in the 11 seasons from 1961 to 1971. And it even took another 25 seasons for the Texas Rangers to make the playoffs for the first time in 1996. But the Rangers have made the playoffs 9 times since 1996. So that's 9 times out of a total of 63 seasons now. And that includes a stretch of 3 times making the postseason between 1996 and 1999, and then 5 times between 2010 and 2016, and most recently behind these 2023 Texas Rangers and Corey Seager leading the way. The Rangers have represented the American League in the World Series 3 different times. In 2010, where they lost to the San Francisco Giants, 2011, when they lost in heartbreaking fashion to David Freese and the St. Louis Cardinals, and then finally in 2023, when they have come out slugging against the Arizona Diamondbacks and have taken home their first World Series championship in franchise history. Up until this year, they were the team with the longest championship drought out of any North American professional sports team when they finally brought home a trophy in their 63rd season as a franchise. Now let's take a moment and look at some interesting facts about the Texas Rangers history. Interesting fact number 1. After moving to Texas, the Rangers actually decided to keep the rights to the Senators' name. That meant that when the Montreal Expos moved to Washington in 2005, they were not able to take on the Senators' name. And the relocated team had to therefore go with the Nationals' name instead, a name that was synonymous with the Senators for a very long time. The Rangers still held the rights to the curly W logo too, that the old Senators team actually used, but they were gracious enough to allow the new Washington Nationals to use the logo. Interesting story number 2, again about the old Washington Nationals. One of the best center fielders of the 1960s was a man by the name of Curt Flood. Now, Flood was an all-star several times over and helped the St. Louis Cardinals to 2 world championships during the late 1960s. But when the Cardinals tried to trade him to the Philadelphia Phillies after the 1969 season, he refused to accept the trade, and he was integral in battling against Major League Baseball on behalf of the Players Union over the reserve clause. Even though Curt Flood didn't win his case in the Supreme Court, it was his sacrifice that helped to establish free agency for all players by the mid-1970s. But in order to fight against Major League Baseball, he had to walk away from the game that he loved. During his time away from the game, his life sort of fell apart in a lot of different ways. He found himself in trouble not only financially, but with alcohol abuse as well. And after an intense battle against Major League Baseball throughout the 1970 season, he decided to return to baseball again to start the 1971 season, signing a contract with the Washington Senators. But unfortunately, he was severely out of shape. He was battling addictions and receiving death threats on a daily basis for being responsible for killing the game of baseball. After only 13 games with the Washington Senators and compiling an OPS plus of 49, Curt Flood fled from his team and the game of baseball at the age of only 33. Now, interesting story number 3 is about another player who battled a lot of demons over his lifetime. Josh Hamilton was the first pick in the 1999 draft from the Tampa Bay Devil Rays, and he proved his value right away, hitting extremely well over his first couple seasons in the minors. But at the same time, he was battling numerous mental health and addiction issues as well. He voluntarily left his teams on several different occasions in 2003, and then failed multiple drug tests and was suspended from baseball several different times between 2004 and 2006. After several stints in rehab and help from a number of different people trying to get him back on track, he finally appeared in his first games back in late 2006. After one season with the Cincinnati Reds in 2007, he found himself with the Texas Rangers in 2008 and given ample opportunity at playing time. He reached some amazing highs during his tenure with the Rangers, including the 2008 Home Run Derby in Yankee Stadium, where he put on an incredible show, and winning the 2010 MVP award after hitting .359 with 32 home runs and a 170 OPS plus. But at the same time, he had several relapses over those years as well. And after 5 successful seasons playing with the Texas Rangers, he signed a 5-year, $125 million contract to go to the Angels. But things fell apart for Hamilton once again when he was in Los Angeles, while dealing with poor performance, injuries, and several more relapses back into drug abuse. And the Angels cut ties with him by trading him back to the Texas Rangers in April of 2015. Now, this was supposed to be a glorious homecoming for Hamilton, but he struggled to stay on the field as well and was released by the team in late 2016. His battle with substance abuse has been a lifelong struggle for him. But for a brief period of time between 2008 and 2013 with the Texas Rangers, his star was able to shine and he was able to show just how magical of a player he could have been. Now let's look at the Ranger uniforms over time. Starting with the Washington Senators, we have to remember that they were the second version of that team, so they wanted to depart just a little bit from the way that the previous Senators team had looked. So they used navy pinstripes and red lettering instead of the navy lettering that was so common for the previous Senator teams. The 1960s is also the time period when they started using the curly W logo. After moving to Texas, the Rangers uniforms have been incredibly consistent over time, when they established a generally red, white, and blue color scheme for the team. Their primary color has typically been white throughout the decades. However, they did experiment with the powder blue uniforms in the mid-1970s, just like most teams. Red jerseys in the mid to late 1990s and the 2010s. Blue jerseys in the 1990s and 2000s. And even the sleeveless jerseys with the big T in the 2010s. The Rangers logo has also evolved over time, from the original baseball with a cowboy hat from the early 1970s to early 1980s. The two State of Texas stylings from the early 80s to the mid-90s, the Lone Star from the mid-90s to the early 2000s, and then finally the current Big T logo, which they've used ever since 2003. There have been no members of the Washington Senators or Texas Rangers that have won the Cy Young Award for the team. But the list of Ranger players to have won the MVP award includes 5 different players. Jeff Burroughs in 1974, Juan Gonzalez twice in 1996 and 1998, Ivan Rodriguez in 1999, Alex Rodriguez in 2003, and Josh Hamilton in 2010. A total of 13 players or managers in the Ranger franchise history are in the Hall of Fame, including 4 from their tenure as the Washington Senators, although 3 of these players, Ted Williams, Nellie Fox, and Gil Hodges, are all associated with those Senators as managers, not players. The only player to have played a short amount of time with the Washington Senators is Minnie Minoso, who played with the Senators at the very end of his career. This means that there are 9 players left over that are associated with the Texas Rangers. 2 of those players are in the Hall of Fame actually wearing a Rangers cap, Nolan Ryan and Ivan Rodriguez. The remaining players like Harold Baines, Burt Blyleven, Goose Gossage, Gaylord Perry, Fergie Jenkins, and Vladimir Guerrero are only associated with the Rangers for a year or maybe a handful of years. Now, there are a number of Ranger players that could join the ranks of the Hall of Fame in the coming years. Adrian Beltre is almost guaranteed to be elected in this next cycle in 2024, and very likely could go in with a Rangers cap on his head. There are a couple more players on the current ballot who played with the Rangers for a year or two, like Andrew Jones and Carlos Beltran. And those guys have a pretty good chance of making it in the future, although they won't be associated with the Rangers when they do go in. Looking ahead more to the future, Max Scherzer is almost a lock to get in, and Corey Seager is on a Hall of Fame path as a 29-year-old. He just has to be able to keep it up for another decade. But we could see him getting there. Looking back, there are guys like Rafael Palmeiro and Alex Rodriguez, guys that are not getting in anytime soon, but could in the far future if the perspective about steroids and the juiced era continues to evolve over time. as well as guys like Kevin Brown, Kenny Lofton, and Will Clark, who have an outside shot of getting in some iteration of the Veterans Committee, but they could be waiting for a long time as well. The list of the 5 best players from Senators and Rangers history, at least from their time with the team, has got to start with Ivan Pudge Rodriguez. After that, I would put Adrian Beltre, and then I would have to put Rafael Palmeiro next at number 3, followed by Buddy Bell and Ian Kinsler. Both of them really good, scrappy infielders that provided a lot of value to the Ranger teams they played on. The list of the best Ranger pitchers all time is very thin. Nolan Ryan and Fergie Jenkins would probably be at the top of the list in terms of quality alone. But the truth is that their tenures were not long enough, and they didn't really pitch their best years while in Texas. So moving beyond that idea a little bit, the best pitcher in Ranger history is probably knuckleballer Charlie Huff, a guy who stayed around the game for a very long time, providing value to his Ranger teams. After that, I'd probably put Kenny Rogers number 2, the pitcher, not the singer. And then number 3, I'd probably say that Fergie Jenkins grabs that spot. After that, I'd put Kevin Brown at number 4 and round it out with a guy like Yu Darvish or maybe Rick Helling. But needless to say, the history of Ranger pitching is not very robust. So there you go. Thanks for joining me in another video all about the history of a Major League Baseball team. The Texas Rangers are brand new 2023 World Series champions. Congratulations to all the Rangers players out there, the Ranger organization, on finally winning your first World Series in franchise history. For the Ranger fans, I'm sure they're hoping this is only one of many more to come. For all you fans out there, enjoy the off season, keep talking baseball, and we'll see you around.